Say that again. So you're suggesting that his belief is that any person in the military
Not
who is a
any person.
holdover from the previous administration, which is virtually everyone, is a problem?
I think he views any kind of non-institutionalized change as part of the issues within the department.
We also know,
Institutionalized
and I don't want to downplay this, because we also know he's written a book about this, that he believes that women in the military are a problem. We also know that he believes that people of color are in large part not qualified for all kinds of different, what he calls DEI reasons.
Abby Phillip directly confronts Jason Rance on Newsnight with Abby Phillip as tensions rise around unexpected Pentagon reshuffles, questioned leadership decisions, and growing concerns about possible bias within the ranks. While Jason Rance attempts to justify the moves and reduce their seriousness, Abby Phillip firmly responds by raising tough questions about the timing, the intent behind these actions, and the possible impact on military stability during a period of rising conflict. So let's take a closer look and see how Abby Phillip pushes back and silences Jason Rance on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
It is, even outside of all of the interpersonal drama, of which there is plenty about this, we're in the middle of a war. And to Army Chief of Staff and to just be purging members of the top military brass in this moment just seems unwise, if not just a great gift to our enemies in terms of what they can say about us in this moment.
Well, I certainly think that the Iranian regime couldn't have seen or gotten something better for them in this instance. I think ultimately what's happening right now is that the United States military is seeing that we're completely have a leadership that is just simply, we don't understand where we're going. I'm particularly concerned about the fact that, the target seems to be moving consistently. I know for this, first it said that there was not going to be a ground invasion. Then we see reports that there could potentially be one. I think that's an issue. And the fact that we're seeing this change in leadership right now, I think is a sign that we don't really know what's going on.
I think to provide some context for it, right? So the armed services, so the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, their job is what we call man, train, and equip. Their job is to recruit the forces, train them, and make sure they're equipped to go to war. And then when we fight a war, there's a 4-star commander in charge of the combatant commands around the world, where we're basically broken up worldwide in geography, and there's a 4-star responsible for fighting in the different areas. So right now the war is being fought by U.S. Central Command. So there's a 4-star commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, down in Tampa, who's responsible for the fight. The Army's job is to transfer forces in accordance with the war plan if there's ground troops or the Navy or the Air Force, regardless. So the folks that were let go today or that were fired, you had the Chief of Chaplains. There's been a problem where I think the Secretary said he had an issue with what he saw as secular humanism in the Chaplains Corps ranks. You want to
I just want to note that it's apparently the first time that the Chief of Chaplains has ever been fired.
In the history of the military.
It's a 4-year term.
In the history of the military, it's the first time there. The Chief of the training side, he's had issues with training, and then him and General George, you just mentioned, had an issue going back to that. But this is part of a series of firings that we've seen across the administration. And I think, as you noted, just in terms of demographics, women make up about 20% of the military, a little bit less than that, a little bit less than 8%.
17%.
17%. And then the general officer ranks only about 8%. But there's been a disproportionate number of women and minority general officers that were fired. And the argument's kind of coming back. Are they being fired because they're minorities, and whether it's gender or ethnic or racial minorities, or is this for another reason? I think the Secretary is coming back and saying that some people were put in positions they shouldn't have been in as a result of that. Other people are saying no, that they deserve to be there, and you're firing them as a result. And that's the two sides of the argument people are making.
And General George, as well as the Army Secretary, so let's not forget the Secretary of Army is a political appointee. So you have here the civilian and the military leadership of the Army working very closely together. And apparently that was part of Hexet's problem, is that he had these two people working closely together.
And just a little bit of context on that.
What really stands out here is how damaging unstable leadership can be, especially during an active conflict, because history shows that sudden changes in military command in wartime usually bring confusion rather than clear direction. And even if control technically remains with combatant commanders, morale and coordination across the wider force can still suffer. And when the situation is as complex as a possible escalation in the Middle East, steady leadership at the top becomes more important than ever, since frequent changes can signal uncertainty, and that is exactly what opponents often try to take advantage of. Another point that raises concern is the pattern of who is being removed, as existing data already shows that women and minorities are underrepresented in senior military roles, particularly at the general officer level. So when a noticeable number of those leaders are being pushed out, it naturally draws attention. Not because of assumptions, but because the context matters, since reaching these positions takes decades of experience, and replacing them so quickly, especially without clear and open reasons, can make it appear less like a careful strategic decision and more like something else. And that kind of perception alone can affect trust, both within the military and outside it. And then there is the broader strategic view, where leadership decisions start to overlap with political messaging, which can blur the line between military effectiveness and political goals. Even though the United States has traditionally kept a strong separation between civilian leadership and professional military judgment to protect the integrity of decision-making. And if that line starts to feel unclear, it raises concerns not only about the present situation, but also about long-term stability. Because in moments like this, what matters most is not just strength, but also clarity, consistency, and confidence in the system overall.
I mean, CNN's reporting is that Randy George was very close to Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, and Hegseth perceived Driscoll as a threat and at times had a contentious relationship with him. Driscoll is also close to J.D. Vance, has been mentioned as a possible replacement for Hegseth.
Yep.
Hegseth's, since Signalgate, since that chat where he was sharing classified information, he seems to be on shaky ground, or at least his perception of his job. And there's some reporting that this is a result of that.
I will say it so you don't have to. He is signaling that he is a very insecure leader right now because he's getting rid of expertise surrounding him. General George brought the Army out of a massive recruitment crisis back in 2020, one of the worst we've seen. He brought it back to full force. He moved to adapt to, and accommodate for the cheap drones and acquisition of cheap drones that we're seeing prevalent in the war in Ukraine, which, oh, by the way, happened to be drones from Iran. So he was doing what he was supposed to do. Him and Secretary Driscoll also both spoke up about the fact that people don't get on these lists for flags to become general officers without having exemplary service. So I find it very interesting that somebody apolitical in the Army Chief of Staff, somebody Republican appointed under Trump, that is who the current Secretary of War is going after.
Jason?
Well, I think Pete Hegseth plays a huge role in recruitment. And I think that's a key reason why you're seeing so many more people volunteering to serve. I think if you don't have trust in the people around you, whether or not they come with expertise, and I have no doubt that they came with expertise, but it's kind of useless if you don't actually trust it. We don't know really what was behind this. Now, again, the reporting suggests that there's some conflict or tension between the two from a personality perspective. Perhaps, maybe this was a case of align versus agree, and they could do neither. But when you're in a position like this, you have to make sure that you trust the people around you. When General McChrystal was fired during the Afghanistan war by President Obama because he downplayed the importance of, at the time, Vice President Joe Biden, while it was obviously a news story, I don't recall some of the same framing. Now, this could be a huge deal, right, at the end of this. We don't know. Right now, it doesn't appear to be a huge deal as far as readiness is concerned with what's going on in Iran right this moment.
But it does say a lot about Pete Hegseth, for sure.
Well,
because it
without knowing his reason.
Well, it says, I mean, you're saying we don't know, but there's actually a lot of reporting that suggests that there are several reasons, including insecurity, as Naira pointed out, but also, I mean, his hand or attempt to have a hand in personnel decisions has been something that across the forces, not just in the Army, has been a problem for senior leadership. He's taking a list of potential one-star promotions that doesn't get political, that is merit-based, that's based on a long process in the military, and he's striking individual names, which, you know, according to the reporting, it's not even clear if it's legal for him to do that.
One point that clearly stands out is how uncommon it is to witness this degree of involvement in military leadership choices, particularly when it comes to promotions and the overall chain of command, since these processes are normally structured to rely on merit and remain protected from political influence to preserve the strength and impartiality of the armed forces. So when reports suggest that senior officials are directly adjusting promotion decisions or moving seasoned leaders aside, it raises real concerns about whether these actions are based on performance or driven by other factors. And over time, history shows that when this boundary becomes unclear, it can slowly damage trust in the institution. Another important issue is the loss of experience at such a sensitive time, because leaders like General Randy George reached their position after decades of hands-on experience and deep understanding of modern threats such as drone warfare and shifting global strategies. So removing that level of expertise during ongoing tensions does not just create a gap, but can also delay decision-making and interrupt continuity. And even when replacements are capable, there's always a period of adjustment that carries its own cost, which in high-pressure situations can have a greater impact than many expect. Then there's the wider question of perception, both within the military and beyond it, because when leadership changes seem connected to internal disputes or loyalty issues rather than clear strategic goals, it can affect morale among service members who need to believe that advancement is based on skill and credibility rather than politics, while at the same time both allies and opponents are closely observing, and such actions can send mixed signals about stability and direction, which adds risk in an already tense global environment. And in situations like this, what truly matters is not just strength, but also clear direction, steady leadership, and trust in the system overall.
So there's the broader picture is of somebody who is a defense secretary who is dealing with both some personality drama, but also has a leadership style that's resulting in mass firings. I'm not sure mass firings are ever really a good sign.
The pattern that I see, and it's not true in every instance, but the pattern that I'm seeing is Secretary Hegseth resents dissent and disagreement, and he resents anyone who he believes is a holdover from the Biden administration. He wants to pick his team. He doesn't want a team that was picked for him. And that is largely who he's been targeting with these firings, are people who he feels like he was stuck with. And to Jason's point, he wants people that he trusts, not people that he's told to trust, but people that he trusts.
But I mean, let's be honest. I mean, this is the military. Virtually everybody at the star level is a holdover from the previous administration. Right. They didn't just show up. They were there because they're all serving under the United States military and whoever the president is at the time.
But if you
so how is that a reason to fire people?
So if you go into this believing that there has to be some systemic change because you believe that a lot of the problems as he perceives them is due to the fact that everyone is in fact a holdover, then this does make sense. And to be clear, unfortunately, there's going to be another Democratic president who's then going to make the exact same changes.
Say that again. So you're suggesting that his belief is that any person in the military who is a holdover from the previous administration, which is virtually everyone, is a problem?
I think he views any kind of non-institutionalized change as part of the issues within the department.
We also know, and I don't want to downplay this, because we also know he's written a book about this, that he believes that women in the military are a problem. We also know that he believes that people of color are in large part not qualified for all kinds of different, what he calls DEI reasons. And so when we see actions that are supported by his own words, that's why there are questions about what the motivations are.
And the entire idea of having a professional force, right, after the Warren Commission, after Vietnam, and not to have drafting family members willy-nilly, was a professionalized force that was separate from all of these political challenges. So listen, if he has an issue with his Secretary of Army, who is a political appointee and maybe threatening, got it. But people who actually know, who have served in Iraq, served in Afghanistan, know how war is conducted, have actually made great gains for our military strength and adaptability, those are probably not the people you want walking out the door.
Looking at this situation more deeply, It raises concern when decisions about military leadership start to feel driven by personal alignment instead of clear strategic thinking, since the U.S. Armed Forces have traditionally operated under a professional and non-political structure, especially at higher ranks, where leaders are expected to continue their service across different administrations without bias. And that stability has always been a key strength. So when experienced officers seem to be removed or pushed aside without clear performance-based reasons, it can unsettle that balance. And in many cases, history shows that when this kind of foundation weakens, it does not improve the system, but instead leads to uncertainty and reduced effectiveness. Another major issue is the sudden loss of accumulated experience at a sensitive time, because senior military leaders do not reach their roles quickly, but build decades of field knowledge through major operations in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, while also adapting to evolving threats such as drones and cyber warfare. So replacing that level of expertise is not immediate, and even if new leaders are fully qualified, there's always a period where adjustment is needed, which can become especially risky during times of global tension, since it affects not only personnel changes, but also the continuity of planning, coordination, and execution. And beyond that, there's also the broader message these shifts send, both within the military and internationally, because when leadership changes appear to be influenced more by ideology or internal preference rather than clear merit-based reasoning, it can raise doubts about the direction of policy and decision-making. Allies who depend on steady and predictable defense structures may start to question stability, while sudden changes can also lower morale inside the military by challenging the idea that advancement is earned through competence and performance. And in situations like this, true strength comes not just from capability, but from consistency, trust, and steady leadership.